Welcome back to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Dr. Deb Krier here, founder and host of DCM Podcast. The intent of this series is to bring to you thought leaders from all walks of life where challenges can abound with conflict. And to recognize that conflict is not always a bad thing, it's oftentimes how we manage it. And so my goal is to bring to you excellent speakers from all over the world. And so today I'm delighted to bring to you Deb Krier. Now Deb has her own interesting story. Once of corporate America and human resources, and then working in the medical profession, she was stunned, she was startled, she was flabbergasted to be diagnosed with cancer, stage 3. Well, that set the alarm bells off for sure. And not only did she go for her usual mammogram, but was called back to learn that it was actually progressed to stage 4. Well, that, as you can imagine, turned her life upside down. While she leads a major marketing business specializing in women, part of her work also is to advance an understanding, care, and concern of how employers can work with their employees when faced with such devastating news like cancer. And she talks about how her own goal was to continue working and how that can frighten people away. And so the thing is, so as we talked about in this podcast that you'll soon be hearing, that we identify strongly with our work. And so the ability to continue working when going through life challenges is tantamount. And so I really like her tagline, trying not to die and surviving cancer. So this is an opportunity for you to listen and learn, share with yourself, others, people that you might know going through something like this, to learn what your employer can do for you and what not. So it's up to you to disclose how much, and together we talk about what's known as the interactive process for employees with medical conditions when it impacts your ability to be at work, stay at work, and perform your work. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Deb as much as I have, and do pass it on. Again, if you haven't already, subscribe, make sure you get notice of all of our future episodes coming, and stay tuned and listen to Deb Krier. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm Dr. Deb Krier, the Mindset Doc and host of this podcast. Today, I'm very delighted to have Deb Krier with me. And Deb actually has her own podcast called the Business Power Hour.
Right.
Great. And she was so wonderful. She invited me to be on her show already, and it just recently was released. And so, that's what we call reciprocation. You got to give,
love it.
Back. Very good. Very good. Yes. So, Deb, in terms of your particular message, which is about surviving cancer, give us a little bit more background.
Well, it's a very long story, so I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. Back in 2015, I was being a good kid. I went in for my annual physical, like we do as women, and had my mammogram and got the phone call. You need to come back. Now, I had worked for an oncologist and for the American Cancer Society, so my little warning signs went off, right? And so went back and discovered that I did indeed have an issue or artifacts. I love it. They called it artifacts because it wasn't a lump. It wasn't a bump. It wasn't anything like that. It's basically spots, little speckles. And so, they said, it's going to be very easy to take care of this. Don't worry about it. It's stage 0. No, not to worry. So I went merrily along with life for a couple months, and then things changed because the diagnosis was changed drastically to actually stage 4, which meant it had spread. And so I had, treatment, obviously, but that didn't go well. This is one of those stories of if it could go wrong, it did. And so ended up in the hospital in ICU in critical condition. And, just obviously, pulled out of that, but it really was a very rough time. I've had multiple surgeries since then. Even though it was in 2015, I am still in treatment. I go in every 3 weeks and I have treatment. And then to top it off, a couple weeks ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Yay!
Oh my gosh. You're right. When it rains, it pours, right? Oh my gosh.
And I remember thinking, well, that's annoying. But it's been obviously a challenge the entire time. But my goal throughout all of it has been not just to survive, but to thrive, and to make sure that I have the people around me that I need to have around me, and to really use what I've been through now to benefit others.
What a journey. Knock on wood. I fortunately have not experienced any kind of cancer, although I have family members who have and who have not survived. So it's now I get routinely screened for all kinds of things these days, So yeah. So the important message: women, get your mammograms.
Oh yes, yeah, and gentlemen, you get those tests done that you're supposed to be doing too.
That's true. Yes, a smaller percentage, but men do get breast cancer as well. So yeah. So I'm curious. One of the emphasis I like to place is not just on life but work. Because we all have to work, and yet life can get in the way of work. And so, in terms of as an employee, as an employer, what would you suggest that employers can do for their employees once diagnosed with cancer?
Right. Well, it's tricky because the employee does not have to tell you. They don't have to tell you anything. And there are many that don't, because they think you will think they can't do their job. We need to let them go. They might be the business owner and they think people are going to think they're weak. So they're not going to tell. Same thing with if they have a close family member that maybe they're going to have to care for. And so they just don't tell. And so that kind of is one of the first things. Is your business needs to be the type of business where people can share those things, to whatever degree they want. I mean, there are people, I share a lot, but some other people don't share very much. So you want them to feel comfortable with coming to you and telling you, whether you're the owner, the HR department, whoever it is, you're the department manager, whatever. And then of course there are some federal laws that kick in, that you do have to follow. And, I'm not an attorney, don't play one on TV. So I always say, double check those things, make sure you know what they are. And it's just good to know those no matter what, because, you could easily have someone who has some type of illness or disability that you need to have this information, and make sure that things like this are covered in your employee policies. Right. Do you get like disability insurance? Do you even have that? Right. Do you allow flexible work arrangements? Now, clearly that has changed quite a bit because of COVID, but did you get everybody back into the office and now this person needs to work from home? All of these various things, and many companies, especially those that are a little bit larger, have the employee assistance programs, the EAPs. So, as the employer, have those in place, and then recognize that when someone does come to you, you can only share what they want you to share. So again, you can't tell the whole world, hey, Deb has cancer, everybody, we need to rally around her. All these things, the employee might say, I don't want anybody to know. Yeah. So, you have to be very cognizant of that. But remember that for the most part, they want and they need to continue working for a variety of reasons, not the least of which they might need a paycheck, and they very well may need those benefits, especially if they get their insurance through you. But, it's also, when we're going through this, we need something to focus our minds on, and work is obviously one of those things. So you need to be as cognizant of that as you possibly can, to allow them to work as much as they possibly can. Now it does get tricky if they're gone a lot, and or their work is just not up to par. And it obviously, some of this depends on, again, state laws. Are you an at-will state where you don't have to give a reason for letting someone go? Now, clearly, you don't want to be the type of business that does something unless you absolutely have to. I mean, sometimes there are just reasons, but make sure that the key is to make sure that you have that in place before all of this happens, so that you can tell them, here's what we're going to do, and all of those things. So it is, again, they want to keep working as much as possible. So to the degree that you can keep them hired, you want to do that, but then the other tricky thing comes in, especially if you haven't been able to share, is the other employees. Are they going to get jealous? Are there going to be conflicts that come up there with, well, hey, Bob's not working an awful lot, but Bob's still getting paid and I'm doing Bob's work. And so be prepared to have those type of conversations too.
Oh, those are excellent points. It's I hadn't really made the connection before, but one of the I work in a very specialized niche of mediation called the interactive process,
right.
And that's designed exactly to help employees and employers navigate confidentially, through what's going on. And I was say, we don't need to know the diagnosis, but we do need to understand what's happening for you and what your needs are and how we might work with you. And that could range anywhere from a temporary leave of absence with job protection under the FMLA, or it could be, a partial schedule and for a while with, active treatment, or allowing additional time off to attend appointments.
Right.
There's all kinds of things that can be done. And so, for any of our listeners and viewers out there, it is called the interactive process under the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Employment and Housing Act here in California. So, there's a process, but not everybody applies the process. So it is available. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up EAP. I recommend a lot of people use their EAP services as something free to the employee and paid for by the employer. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious then, did you find yourself having to take a lot of time off while you were
I did.
active?
Now, the nice thing is I am my business, and so I gave myself that grace, but I had clients. I am a consultant. And so, of course, the first decision was, do I even tell them? At that point, the clients that I was working with, we never really met in person. It was all done online. And so I pretty much figured they didn't need to know, and then of course the world came crashing down and I was in the hospital and all sorts of things. So then I did have to tell them. And of course I have discovered that my clients are absolutely wonderful people and, very understanding, because I do have to tell them, every 21 days, I'm going to, lose a day. It's pretty much just a day, but, and of course they're wonderful about that. And let's be honest, if you're working with somebody that has issues with some of this, maybe it's not where you want to be.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was a challenge. And of course, what I needed to do was find somebody who could help me, so I'm a subcontractor. I needed to subcontract my work and have somebody else do it. And then I laugh and say, one of the things that I discovered during all of this is doctors' offices and hospitals have really good Wi-Fi. And so many times I just worked merrily along and nobody ever knew that I was in the hospital. And again, it gave me something to do, gave me something to focus on. But yeah, I just kept right on working. And, and my clients were like, really, you were out? Now it is a challenge. Are you going to tell those people that, because especially if you are a consultant, a freelancer, subcontractor, whatever your role is it easy to replace you? Yeah. And, and that really does come into it, because depending on the type of contract you have, and let's be honest, contracts, as the lawyers like to say, they're only as good as the paper they're written on. So, you might you might think you've got a good contract. You might think you've got a good relationship with them, but they're going to say, no, we need somebody that, and it's not really that they're saying that they can count on, but it is kind of that, because, you've got all these other things that you're working on. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, it is. And, that I like what you had to say as far as, if your employer is not very understanding of this, then maybe that's not the job for you. And one thing I always sort of not open up with, but disclose early on is that, the reality is, we're human beings, and we're all going to have a medical condition that may impact our ability to be at work, stay at work, perform the work. And so this could be you. And it really, let's say, comes across well, particularly for those who are maybe reluctant or skeptical about trying to work with an employee. And the other thing that becomes really important is, is this a temporary situation or is this long term? And certainly, cancer can be something that can be longer term, but usually with treatment, then
it's got a finite time period.
Yeah. And so those are all important things to review when we're either an employee to contemplate talking to our employer, or as an employer, and how to work with the employee. And so very well spelled out process. I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that what about coworkers? And so how can coworkers help in ways without necessarily violating your privacy?
Right. Again, it depends on how much they know. If they know what's going on, one of the things that I have discovered, through this whole process is many times people want to help, but they have absolutely no idea how. That's probably one of the biggest questions I get is, we don't know what to do. And it's almost like when someone passes away, you don't know what to say. And so, from the coworker's perspective, it's kind of one of those things, don't ignore it. Because it might be very visible what's going on. I mean, if you've lost your hair, if you're, all sorts of things. So it's okay to acknowledge that and to say, excuse me, how you doing today? Anything I can do to help? And then there are a lot of other things, if say the employees are at home, whether they're working from home or just home, you might arrange to have meals delivered. And things like that. Again, you need to ask, because they might not want that. It was so cute. I had people who delivered meals for me, and I couldn't eat any of it. I mean, now my husband thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But, and again, the thought was there. And so it was just absolutely wonderful. But, just check and see. And then other things, depending, it's kind of like, when kids are gone from school, somebody needs to bring them their homework, and things like that. So the same thing might apply. You need to find out, do you need something from work? Do we need to bring it to you? It is just, again, it depends on how open, they are to those discussions. But, and if you can have kind of one person who takes the lead so that, you don't have all sorts of confusion going on. Maybe that's their manager. Maybe it's, their good friend at work, but somebody who's going to kind of coordinate kind of that office care thing.
Right. Yeah, those are great suggestions. I recall several years ago that a member of my social community became ill with cancer, and so we had I think there was one for every day of the month that would take responsibility for taking a meal over.
There's actually software that helps you do that.
Yeah. So, and that was just, it was so, that way we didn't overwhelm her by wanting to see her, and we were sort of on one-on-one, and we only did it once a month, and that was really, really great. And I know that talking about, coordinating with work, with my first child, had some complications with my pregnancy, and so I had to go out of work about 2.5 months early. And I ran the company. I had the employees.
You were there. You had to.
Yeah. But it was, as long as I wasn't up and moving, I could still work. And so, my staff came, drop by a couple times a week, or I'd call and say, hey, I've got stuff to pick up. And it was very, very easy. And that's one thing to put out there. I know some employers may have very strict policies about not working from home, particularly after COVID.
Right.
And yet I think it's where we really need to be flexible and think outside the box, because as you said, work is very important to us. Our self-concept, our identity is oftentimes very connected to the work that we do. And so giving people something meaningful so that they're not just focusing on going to their treatments or chemotherapy or whatever, it gives them something different to do. And that can also be very healthy for the recovery. And that way the employer is still getting something out of it, while the employee is feeling strong enough or whatever to actually perform some work.
Right. And let's be honest, it makes the employer look good. Right. And we're not saying that they're only doing it for that reason, but we want to work for companies and employers and managers and all those who have empathy, who care about their employees. Unfortunately, there's always going to be somebody sometimes who pushes the things, and sometimes that means that everybody gets penalized. But it's and I think more and more, especially with our millennials who are saying, they want to work for companies that care about their employees. I think we have to, to the degree that we can. Obviously, it depends on what you do, and all sorts of things. But to the degree that we can, we need to make sure that we're remembering just, our employees are, there for a long time, they were assets, right?
Yes.
They're not, they're people, I tell people, I'm not a patient, I'm a person, and they are people. They're not employees.
So well said. So well said. Yes. Because it's amazing, when you show some care, concern, compassion, about, you're actually helping that person create a more relaxed life,
right?
In managing a condition, because medical conditions are extremely scary.
Right. So you get rid of any stress you can.
Yeah. And you can develop community. I was sharing with somebody earlier that because I will share personal stories with clients if there's relevance. Just say, this is what happened for me, and I realized how anxious I had become, and so I certainly had techniques, but I started actively applying, redesigning, and so forth. So I've since come up with a number of techniques that will help us through those moments, and in that case, we had a series of deaths in just a short period of time. And so, but then when I share that story, then others can identify with that, and so now we've got some connection. And again, we feel a little bit closer to that person and feel a sense of understanding. Yeah. I'm curious, when we, you mentioned some things early on as far as using EAP, making sure that, employers have a process in place. I know one thing that I oftentimes will remind my employer customers is to, don't assume that everybody remembers what's in the employee handbook.
Right. I know, you get it on your first day, right? And it might go in a drawer. And do they even print them anymore? I mean, that's the other thing. We're told they're online.
Not. Yeah, probably not. Yeah. But, that's where, sort of refreshers, like on an annual basis on just here's some highlights. And we do have this, program for employees when medical conditions occur. I know some employers will even have catastrophic leave banks where people have donated their leaves to help out people. And that's a really valuable, wonderful thing too.
Right.
Yeah. And when you, is there anything else that you feel an employer can do to help co-workers and employees with cancer during this difficult time?
You need to let the person who has cancer, that employee, let them take the lead. Don't push them into disclosing anything more than they want. I joked about school. Sometimes people are saying, hey, we need a note from your doctor if you've been gone. Well, there are still places that require that. But it shouldn't, it should not go into detail. And let's be honest, I'm not even sure those are quite kosher anymore. But I can understand why. Some employers say, hey, we need to know why you've been gone, but yeah, don't push them to disclose anything more than they want to. And understand that could change daily. One day they might want to share everything, and the next day they're like, oh, I'm not going to talk about anything. And so just kind of let them take the lead. And again, this is not just with cancer. I mean, you're going to have employees who have long-term illnesses or have catastrophic short-term type of things, right. Or as you mentioned, death, in their family, things like that. Just kind of be empathetic, and and I think that is probably the biggest thing, is let them do what they, how they want to do it. And if they want to share for an hour, then you let them share for an hour. Yeah. If they want to tell you, I'm good, or my favorite, yeah, how you doing today? Fine. Yeah. And that's the worst word in the world, right? Especially from a doctor's perspective, because it could mean I'm about to die or everything's hunky dory, right? Yeah. And so maybe don't let them get by with fine. Just, gently, you okay? Anything we can be doing, but if if they're not wanting to share, then they're not going to share, but let them know they can. That's the thing.
Yeah. I think, to echo on that a little bit is to, as an employer, once you are aware of an employee who has a medical condition, and like you said, not just cancer, but to reach out and say, we have various policies, we have practices, how can we best support you through all of this? Right. Would you like a refresher on what those things are? Or, but to ask, as you said, ask the employee, how would you like us to support you? What are you comfortable with?
Just don't go put your EAP brochure on their desk.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and I know I get asked a lot, given my line of mediation that I do, as far as, well, what do we tell employees then? Is that, there are some special accommodations that are necessary for a short while. Right. And normally, we talk about 60 days. Now, it's not always easy for an employer to do that, but it's short. When people have a time frame and it's relatively short term, 2 months go by before we even know it. Or maybe even go 90 days. But just say, it's important that we implement some temporary accommodations to work with our employees, because now you're sending a positive message to all the other employees. Yeah.
Well, and it's important that you are discussing it with them. Back in my former life, I was in corporate communications, and we discovered, and we all know this, that if you don't tell people something and something's going on, they will make it up.
They will fill the void with their own thoughts.
We abhor a space. And so we will fill it with something, and almost always it's incorrect. And so, you need to address that, even if you're having to be very vague, and just say, we have a situation, and we're dealing with it to the best of our ability. We do know, that it's impacting things. If you have concerns, come to us. That might be all you can say.
Yeah. It can be frustrating, I know, but it's also important. I always emphasize, there's some things that are simply confidential, and I'm not at liberty to disclose on behalf of the of others. Just like you probably want me to disclose your situation to anybody else. I go, oh no, please, I don't need to know anymore.
Yeah, and then you've got the people like me that share everything, right?
Yeah. Almost TMI, too much information.
Right. And let's be honest, that might actually be something you need to deal with, is to say, we didn't need to know what happened at your last test in gory detail. And so, it's kind of a balancing act between too much information, not enough information, and the type of information that people give.
Yeah, it does require a certain modicum of tact, so I want to make sure that I address a couple of your things, as you've got a blog post.
Right.
What do I do now? First steps for caregivers under the Family and Medical Leave Act. And so, I love your website name, Trying Not to Die.
Right. And it's
So,
.live as opposed to
.live, I
.com.
see that
Yeah,
too. Yep.
.live.
Yep.
And I'll be honest, that blog post was written by an employment attorney,
Oh,
and so that it's a little bit more than if I were to write it, which is good. We need to bring in the experts when we need to bring in the experts. Yeah, it's a great blog post that answers a lot of questions.
great. And then your own company is called Wise Women Communications. I love
It
that.
is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it for 20 years, more than 20 years. And as I mentioned, we are consultants. It's a full service marketing agency.
Okay.
So but the nice thing, it does give the flexibility to be able to say, I'm going to take a little bit of time off.
Okay. Great. And yeah, I was just going to ask you to say a little bit more about what does Wise Women Communications do, but you answered my question in terms of you work with organizations on their marketing, right?
Right. We do tend to focus on social media, how you use it as a marketing tool. And then, marketing people will always tell you, find your niche. Our niche, at least for right now, is working with senior living communities and helping them to get their messages out there.
Yeah. Very important, particularly as the baby boomers continue to
live
longer and be active. And Yes. One other thing I wanted to share that, many of us are dog lovers, and have my own little dog sitting not too far from me. But you're board member of the National Beagle Club of America.
I am. That is just the kind of one of the strangest things in the world. So I married a man who showed dogs. He showed and still shows beagles. So like Snoopy, right? And have over the years gotten more and more involved in, and I sit on the board of the National Beagle Club of America.
Wow.
It's a very unusual hobby, but I guess, there's certainly things that could be a lot worse.
Oh, absolutely. I've actually quite a number of my guest speakers, maybe I'm attracting them in some way, have a real passion for dogs or are active and, like maybe a club like yours or rescue shelters.
Rescue is so important.
Yeah. And so it's been quite a few. Yeah. It's been very active in that arena. So I think it just goes to show the compassion and care we have for living things. Great. So, what, if somebody were to find out that they have cancer, what would be 2 or 3 tips that you might give them in order to start their journey?
One of the first things I tell people is step away from the keyboard. Dr. Google is not our friend, especially with something like this. And it doesn't matter what your cancer diagnosis is, whether it's something like, breast cancer, or something much more unusual. There's so much information out there that you're going to get overwhelmed very quickly. I advise people, Mayo Clinic and American Cancer Society are the places where I go. But you are the person in charge, not your doctor, not your cancer. You are the person in charge. And so you need to make sure that is the case. You do what you want. Now you should do some research, find out what the options are, all sorts of things that are out there. But you are the person in charge, but build your tribe. It's funny, when I was very first diagnosed, I saw this thing and it said, fate says to the warrior, we cannot withstand the storm. And the warrior responds, I am the storm. And so for me, all of us who have cancer are warriors, but we are not solitary warriors. We have to build our tribes around us. And that includes our family, our coworkers, our friends, our medical people, because they are part of that too. And so build those tribes. And again, to the degree that you want to or not, make sure that you've got that support. I mentioned, going back in for thyroid cancer. This is just the stupidest thing in the world. And luckily we caught it early, no further treatment, all that good stuff. Did have to have my thyroid removed. But the amount of support when I told people, hey, this is just unbelievable. And so anytime I go in for something, I'm never alone. There's this bubble of support that is around me. And I think one of the saddest things I ever saw was I had posted something on Facebook and about, having cancer. And somebody responded. I have no idea who they are. I mean, they were, a lot of my posts are public, so people respond. And his response was, I have never felt so alone in my life. And it broke your heart. I mean, it just, not knowing anything at all, it just broke your heart. But numerous people who did not know this man, what can we do to help? Do you need to, all these various things. And of course, I reached out to him and said, what do you need? But, it is, we are alone in this process, but we don't have to be alone.
Right.
And so I think that's the thing. And now one of my things is I go through it with a sense of humor. I swear that every time I have surgery, they knock me out early just because they want to shut me up. But yeah, it's, I have fun with it. I laugh, I joke, appropriately. Right. There are times where you do have to be serious because I've been known to give them the wrong name. They will say, what's your name and birthday? And I smile sweetly and I say, Anastasia Beaverhausen. I had one try to write that down. I'm like, no. But yeah, you have to go through it and when laughing when you can.
Yeah. What you just said there, Deb, reminds me of a colleague in the my TEDx coach, Frank King, says, and he's a comic. Put a little plug in for him. He used to write for Jay Leno show for quite a while. Yeah, but he's got this wry sense of humor, and one of his topics is actually on suicide. But what he says is that where there's laughter, there's life. And so, it is important that we use humor to lighten things up. And just, I've always got to do a little plug for the neuroscience, but, laughter can, actually change the
dopamine increases, all sorts of things. And so, yeah, I mean, it's humor and laughter are very important parts of the healing process, and I think that is something, and let's be honest, sometimes this sucks. When they told me I had thyroid cancer, I said bad words. And then I was like, okay, now what do we do? And it's funny because it's has temporarily affected my voice. I tell people I sound like a rabid chipmunk. Could I crawl in a corner and cry? Sure. Or could I say, hey, I sound like a rabid chipmunk, and so we're going to have an interview anyway.
Well, it is important to laugh. It is important to bring out the humor and like you said, of the appropriate kind. But why not lighten up the moment? Right. People enjoy a good story. They enjoy laughing. And so let's keep living.
I try and make my doctors and nurses and I try and make them laugh too. Because they have such incredibly hard jobs, and so if I can do something to brighten their day a little bit, I'm going to try that.
Well, Deb, this has been absolutely fascinating, again, a survivor yourself. And, and thank you so much for sharing your story, because I think it will really touch the hearts and minds of lots of people.
Well, thank you for asking.
Yes, very much so. And, I look forward to having you again sometime and learning more about your marketing company. And so we will be in touch.
Most definitely. And anybody who wants to, go to thebusinesspowerhour.com and you can hear my interview with Dr. Deborah.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Very good. Well, thank you again, Deb. And to all of our listeners and viewers, don't go away. We've got another great show coming up. But right now, stop and think a little bit about what you've learned from Deb and what you can pass on to others who are important in your life. Dr. Deb Krier, the Mindset Doc. Well, I sure hope that you got a lot out of Deb Krier's interview, where she talks about not only her own professionalism in human resources and dealing with employee medical conditions in the workplace, but how she was impacted and what she gained from her own experience with cancer. Unfortunately, that's something we face more and more every day. And having worked in the area of employee disabilities in the workplace for over 30 years, the wealth, that's not even the right word, the breadth of medical conditions that now impact our employees in today's world is phenomenal and needs extra special care.
or how we respond. So I hope you got that out of Deb, but always come back. We have a monthly Q&A on medical conditions in the workplace, and so another podcast to take a look at. Well, our next guest speaker is somebody who I was really excited to meet about a year ago at a national conference where we were both speakers on the stage, Sam Artery. And Sam, comes to us with a history of litigation, but also an unexpected turn into mediation. He speaks coast to coast on conflict engagement, mediation, negotiation, and has trained and consulted with people in the legal and non-legal settings on how to manage difficult situations. I gained a lot. I learned a wonderful acronym called PARK. So you'll get to know how to park when you come back and join us again in just 2 more weeks. So please, join me, subscribe, pass it on. Encourage other people you know who might be interested in the kinds of topics we explore in decoding the conflict mindset. Thanks for coming. Dr. Deb Krier, the Mindset Doc. Remember, subscribe now, like what you heard, and your comments are always welcome.